a forgotten valley, where time seemed to congeal like the frost on evergreen boughs, lay the village of endless winter. Its name, whispered in tones both reverent and resigned, spoke of a place enshrined in perpetual frost. The villagers, though rugged in constitution, carried an unspoken heaviness, an enduring bond with a season that never released them from its grip. The sun, pale as the eye of a fading spectre, never rose far enough to banish the shadows of the peaks. The mountains loomed like frozen sentinels, their crags etched with ice that shimmered faintly even in the gloom. Below, snow blanketed everything, homes, fields, even the narrow paths trod by heavy boots. Yet, amidst the cold, the people of the village clung fiercely to one tradition, the Frost Festival. Each winter, though every season there was winter, they gathered beneath the great evergreen in the village square. Ice lanterns, delicate orbs of frozen water encasing flickering flames, lined the paths. Children sang songs of frost spirits, their breath turning to mist that hung like fragile veils in the air. And at the heart of it all stood the great crystal they called the Heart of Winter. It towered above the festivities, a gleaming spire of ice that seemed to drink in the meager sunlight and cast it back as a pale, soothing glow. But this year the glow had faltered. The villagers, already burdened by the endless cold, felt the change like a tremor in their hearts. The heart of winter had always been their silent guardian, its light a sign of harmony between the village and the winter spirits. Yet now, its radiance was weak, dimming as though a veil of shadow threatened to consume it. Elder Vilmar, the keeper of the festival's rites, stood before the crystal one, twilight, as the snow whispered down around him. His hands, gnarled as the roots of a long-frozen tree, traced the surface of the heart. Where once it had been smooth and cool, it now felt brittle, its edges fraught with hairline fractures. "It is not the cold," he muttered to himself, though his breath misted before him in the frigid air. "It is something deeper, something waning." The villagers whispered among themselves in hushed tones. Could the spirits be angry? Had they neglected some ancient custom, forgotten in the tide of years? Despite the unease, preparations for the Frost Festival continued. It was tradition after all. And in the village of endless winter, tradition was the one flame that never flickered. Anya, the youngest of the villagers, watched with wide, curious eyes as the lanterns were hung and the great evergreen was adorned with garlands of frost-tipped pine cones. Her small hands helped where they could, fetching wood, carrying woven baskets of snowberries. But her gaze always returned to the heart of winter. "Why does it seem sad?" she asked her mother one evening, her voice barely louder than the snow falling around them. "Sad?" her mother echoed, brushing the girl's red hair from her eyes. "It's only the cold, my love. The cold makes everything seem heavy." but Anya shook her head. Number? It feels different this year, like it's waiting for something. Her mother didn't answer. What could she say to a child when even the elders held no answers? As the festival's eve approached, the villagers huddled close in their homes, murmuring prayers to the frost spirits. Outside, the snow deepened, soft and silent as sleep. Beneath the surface, in the dark places where frost clung like a second skin to the roots of trees and the stones of old wells, something stirred. It was small, this stirring, almost imperceptible. Yet it spread, like the first crack in a frozen pond. In the forest beyond the village, a faint glow pulsed beneath the snow. Something new, something fragile, had entered the world unseen and unbidden. And as the villagers fretted over their dimming heart, the tiny dragonling blinked its frost-colored eyes for the very first time. The forest beyond the village was a labyrinth of silence. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches draped in veils of snow so thick that the moonlight barely kissed the ground. Beneath the frozen canopy, the air seemed alive, yet still. A paradox of winter, motion locked in place by frost's unyielding grip. In this silence, a faint glow flickered. It began as a spark no brighter than a firefly, but grew steadily, illuminating the hollows and crevices of the forest floor. Beneath a blanket of snow, a shell fractured. Its surface shimmered with hues of icy blue, each crack releasing threads of frost that coiled in the air like ghostly tendrils. From within, a creature emerged, small, fragile, and luminous. The dragonling was no larger than a house cat. Its scales glistened as though they were carved from frost itself, reflecting the pale light of the moon that had broken through the clouds. Tiny puffs of mist curled from its nostrils as it shook off the remnants of its icy shell. Its eyes, silver and wide, held the curious gleam of new life. Yet there was something ancient about the way it moved, an instinctual grace that seemed at odds with its fragile frame. Drawn by an unseen force, the hatchling took its first tentative steps through the snow. Its claws left delicate imprints in the frost, each step accompanied by a faint crackle as ice reformed behind it. It did not cry out or stumble, but moved with purpose, as though it had been born with the knowledge of where it needed to go. Ahead, faint lights flickered, the ice lanterns of the Frost Festival, casting their feeble glow against the encroaching darkness. The dragonling paused, its head tilting as it studied the distant glow. With a soft chirp, it began to move again, its trail a winding path of frost that shimmered in the moonlight. The festival grounds were quiet now. Preparations had ceased for the night, and the villagers had retreated to their homes. Only Anya lingered, sitting cross-legged near the base of the great evergreen. She loved these moments when the world felt suspended in stillness. Her small fingers traced patterns in the snow absent-mindedly drawing spirals that faded into the cold. Above her, the ice lanterns swayed gently in the wind, their light dim but persistent. She didn't notice the dragonling at first. It moved cautiously, blending seamlessly with the snow around it. But as it approached the lanterns, their faint glow reflected off its scales, casting shimmering patterns on the ground. The movement caught Anya's eye, and she froze, her breath hitching. The creature stepped closer, its head cocked in curiosity. It chirped again, a soft, melodic sound that echoed faintly in the cold air. Anya's heart raced, not with fear but with awe. She had heard tales of frost spirits and creatures born of winter's breath, but she had never imagined one so small, so gentle. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling like the frost-kissed wind. Slowly, she extended her scarf, offering it as though the dragon might need it for warmth. The creature paused, its silver eyes locking onto hers. Then, with a tentative step, it moved closer and nuzzled the fabric, its cold scales brushing against her fingers. Anya giggled softly, a sound that felt out of place in the solemn stillness. "You're not a spirit, are you?" she murmured, studying the dragonling's frost-dappled form. "You're something else." The dragon chirped again, a sound that seemed almost like agreement. It pressed closer, curling its tail around her outstretched hand. Its breath formed tiny snowflakes that danced in the air before settling on her scarf. For a long moment, they sat together in the quiet. A girl and a creature of frost, bound by an unspoken understanding. Anya didn't know what this dragonling was, or why it had appeared, but she felt its presence like a whisper in her soul, a faint echo of something miraculous. Unbeknownst to her, others had seen the creature too. A shadow moved near the edge of the festival grounds as Elder Vilmar emerged from the darkness, his eyes narrowing as they fell upon the dragon. He stood silently, his breath clouding the air as he observed the scene. The frost dragon, its shimmering form, the way it interacted with Anya, it was both wondrous and ominous. The elder turned away, his steps heavy as he returned to the village. In his heart, a seed of unease took root. What did the arrival of this creature mean for the heart of winter, already dimming before their eyes? The frost dragon nestled against Anya's side, its silvery eyes half closed in contentment. Neither of them noticed how the faint light of the ice lantern seemed to grow brighter in its presence, casting the shadows of the night a little further back. Morning in the village of endless winter was not a true morning. The sun remained a ghostly orb, barely cresting the jagged peaks, its light more shadow than illumination. The frost dragon's arrival had remained for now a secret shared between Anya and the twilight. Yet, whispers have a way of weaving through the still air of a village, slipping into homes like the cold itself. As preparations for the frost festival reached their crescendo, the villagers moved with less cheer than in years past. The dimming of the heart of winter cast a pall over their spirits. It had always been their talisman, its light a promise that, despite the unyielding cold, their bond with winter was one of harmony, not hostility. Now the light faltered, a fragile pulse that seemed to weaken with every passing hour. Elder Vilmar gathered the villagers in the square. His voice, deep as the rumble of distant glaciers, carried a grim edge. "The festival begins tonight," he said, his breath curling like smoke in the cold air. "But the heart of winter grows faint. We must take care not to anger the spirits further." The crowd murmured uneasily. What could have caused the heart's weakening? Some muttered of forgotten rituals. Others cast wary glances at the forest's edge. The frost spirits were capricious, the elders had always warned. They gave their gifts sparingly and could just as easily withdraw them. Anya stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching her scarf as though it might shield her from the weight of their worry. Tucked beneath her coat, a faint warmth pulsed. A secret nestled close to her heart. The frost dragon had followed her home, curling into a tight ball at her bedside. It had seemed so small, so harmless. How could something so gentle bring harm? But even Anya had noticed the changes. The dragon's frosty breath had crystallized the edges of her scarf, turning the fabric into a delicate lace of ice. When it had touched her window, fractals spread across the glass, more intricate than any she had ever seen. And now, as she listened to Vilmar's warnings, she wondered, was it a coincidence that the heart of winter dimmed just as the dragon appeared? That night, the frost festival began. The square was alive with muted beauty. Garlands of snowberries hung from the great evergreen, their crimson hues a sharp contrast to the pallid light of the lanterns. The villagers lit bonfires, their flames flickering feebly against the encroaching cold. Yet, despite the efforts, there was an air of unease, a sense that the festival was a mere shadow of what it should be. Anya arrived late, her coat pulled tightly around her. The frost dragon was hidden beneath, its tiny body a cool weight against her chest. She lingered near the edges of the festival, her gaze fixed on the heart of winter. Its once dazzling light was dimmer than ever, barely casting a glow across the snow. Elder Vilmar approached the crystal, his movements deliberate. He knelt before it, murmuring words in the ancient tongue, a plea, a prayer, a desperate bargain. But the heart remained silent, its fractured surface catching the meager light of the lanterns, but offering none in return. The dragon stirred beneath Anya's coat, its silvery eyes peeking out from the folds. Anya glanced down, her heart hammering. It was as if the creature sensed the crystal's distress. Its scales shimmered faintly, casting soft rays of light through the fabric. "Anya?" A voice startled her. She turned to find her mother, her brow furrowed in concern. "Why are you lingering here? The others are gathering by the fires." I'm fine," Anya stammered, clutching the dragon tighter. But her mother's gaze lingered, her expression shadowed by the same worry that gripped the entire village. Before either could say more, a faint sound rippled through the square. A gasp, a murmur that grew into a low, collective cry. The heart of winter flickered. Its light, faint as it was, dimmed further, plunging the square into a deeper gloom. Elder Vilmar rose, his face pale, his voice trembling as he addressed the crowd. "The spirits have turned their backs on us," he declared. "Something has disturbed the balance." The villagers turned to one another, their fear palpable. Anya shrank back, her fingers brushing the dragon's icy scales. She could feel its heartbeat, steady and unyielding, a strange counterpoint to the fear swirling around her. As the villagers debated and despaired, Anya slipped away, her steps muffled by the snow. She carried the frost dragon to the edge of the square, away from the accusing glances, away from the weight of Elder Vilmar's proclamation. The dragon chirped softly, its breath forming a small cloud of frost that glittered in the moonlight. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant crackle of the bonfires. "Why are you here?" The dragon lifted its head, its silver eyes meeting hers, with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. It was as though the creature understood her question, understood more than it should. And for the first time, Anya wondered if the heart of winter and this tiny, miraculous being were not opposed forces but threads of the same story, waiting to be unraveled. The festival's night stretched long and still, as if the stars themselves held their breath. The villagers' joy was muted, their laughter faltering as they glanced toward the heart of winter, now little more than a shadow of its former brilliance. Even the youngest children, who had never known anything but the comfort of its glow, huddled close to their parents, their songs quiet and uncertain. Anya watched from the edges of the square. The frost dragon nestled in her arms. Its silvery eyes reflected the pale light of the ice lanterns, shimmering like the surface of a frozen lake. She felt the faint pulse of its breath against her chest, a rhythm so steady it seemed to defy the tension around her. But the village elders were restless. Elder Vilmar's face was etched with lines of worry as he approached the heart of winter once more, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "The spirits are displeased," he murmured to the gathered crowd. His voice, though low, carried the weight of a final pronouncement. "We must act, or this will be the last frost festival." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their murmurs a soft tide of fear. What act could restore the balance? What offering could reignite the heart's light? No one spoke the answers aloud, for no one truly knew. As the crowd dispersed into smaller groups, their voices falling to whispers, Anya slipped away, her feet crunching softly against the snow. The frost dragon stirred, lifting its head as if sensing her thoughts. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to leave the square, to escape the weight of the village's fear and uncertainty. Her steps carried her to the edge of the forest, where the trees stood like silent watchers, their branches heavy with snow. There, in the quiet embrace of the woods, she knelt and placed the dragon on the ground. It chirped softly, its breath forming a delicate frost flower that bloomed briefly before dissolving into the cold air. "I don't understand," Anya whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you here to help us or to harm us? The heart of winter, it's fading and no one knows why. But since you arrived..." The dragon tilted its head, its gaze meeting hers with a startling intensity. Then it moved, its tiny claws scratching at the frost-covered ground. With a deliberate motion, it blew a puff of icy breath toward the forest's edge. The snow shimmered and began to shift, forming delicate patterns, swirls, spirals, and shapes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Anya's breath caught. The patterns were beautiful, intricate as lace, but they were more than that. They were symbols, strange yet familiar, like fragments of a forgotten story. She reached out to touch them, her fingers tingling as they brushed the frost. Images flashed in her mind, visions of winters long past, of the heart of winter glowing brighter than the stars, and of creatures like the dragon, their frosty forms dancing through the snow. "It's you," she breathed. "You're part of it, aren't you? The heart of winter. It needs you." The dragon chirped again, this time more insistently, and began to move. It scampered toward the square, its small form almost vanishing against the snow. Anya hesitated for only a moment before following, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. When they reached the festival grounds, the villagers were still gathered, their voices rising in uncertain debate. Elder Vilmos stood near the heart of winter, his expression grim. The great crystal seemed smaller now, its light so faint it barely touched the snow at its base. Anya stepped forward, her voice breaking through the murmurs. "Wait," she called, her small figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the lanterns. "I think I know what to do." The crowd turned toward her, their faces a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Anya stepped closer, cradling the frost dragon in her arms. Its silvery eyes reflected the dimming light of the heart, and its breath formed a faint mist that drifted towards the crystal. Elder Vilmar's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "It's not a spirit," Anya said firmly. "It's something else. But it came when the heart began to fade, and I think it can help." Before the elder could object, the dragon wriggled free of Anya's arms and stepped toward the heart of winter. The crowd gasped as it approached the great crystal, its tiny claws leaving trails of frost on the snow. The dragon paused, then exhaled a long, shimmering breath. The effect was instantaneous. The frost coiled around the heart, weaving intricate patterns across its fractured surface. The faint glow grew stronger, spreading outward in ribbons of icy light. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the heart began to pulse with a steady, radiant brilliance. A cheer rose, hesitant at first but growing louder as the villagers realized what had happened. The heart of winter was restored, its light casting the square in a dazzling glow. The frost dragon turned back to Anya, chirping softly before curling at her feet, its work complete. For the first time that winter, the villagers felt the warmth of hope. Anya knelt beside the dragon, her heart full of wonder. The festival continued, its songs and laughter echoing into the night. But Anya knew this was only the beginning. The dragon was more than a visitor. It was a part of their story, a living thread in the tapestry of their endless winter. The frost dragon lingered at the foot of the heart of winter, its shimmering scales catching and refracting the light in 1,000 hues of pale blue and silver. The great crystal, once dim and fractured, now pulsed steadily, its light expanding outward to touch every corner of the village square. The villagers watched, their breath fogging in the cold air, as though afraid to disturb the fragile miracle unfolding before their eyes. Elder Vilmar approached cautiously, his step slow and deliberate. The frost dragon's silvery eyes met his, and for a moment the elder paused, uncertainty flickering across his face. He turned to the crowd, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "This creature," he said, gesturing to the dragon, "is no ordinary beast. It is tied to the heart, a part of the balance we did not fully understand." The villagers murmured among themselves, the earlier fear in their voices giving way to curiosity and wonder. Anya stepped forward, her small frame casting a long shadow in the heart's glow. She knelt beside the dragon, her hands brushing its icy scales. "It didn't come to harm us," she said softly. "It came because the heart needed it. Maybe we needed it too." The frost dragon chirped, its breath forming delicate frost flowers on the ground. It moved closer to the heart of winter, circling it with deliberate steps. Where its claws touched the snow, patterns of frost bloomed spirals, stars, and shapes that seemed to pulse with an energy beyond the understanding of the villagers. As the dragon completed its circle, the patterns rose, forming a lattice of frost that entwined with the heart, solidifying the light that now radiated from within. A gasp rippled through the crowd as the heart of winter responded. Its light grew brighter, warmer, not with heat, but with a kind of vitality that seemed to seep into the air, lifting the cold's oppressive weight. The crystal's fractures disappeared, its surface smoothing into a seamless spire of brilliance. For the first time in living memory, the village felt a shift in the season that surrounded them. The cold was no longer an unyielding force, but a companion, alive and vibrant. Elder Vilmar knelt, his hand resting on the heart's surface. "It's whole again," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, stronger than before. The villagers erupted into cheers, their earlier despair forgotten. The Frost Festival, which had begun under the shadow of uncertainty, now burned bright with joy and hope. The bonfires roared, the ice lanterns glowed with renewed brilliance, and the songs of the children rang out into the night. Yet amidst the celebration, Anya's gaze remained fixed on the frost dragon. As the night deepened, the frost dragon returned to Anya's side, curling its small body against her. She stroked its scales, feeling the faint chill that radiated from them. "You're not just part of the heart," she said quietly. "You are the heart, in a way, aren't you?" The dragon chirped softly, a sound that could have been agreement or simply its way of communicating. Anya glanced at the villagers, their faces aglow with happiness. They had welcomed the miracle without fully understanding it. And perhaps that was enough. But Anya felt the weight of the dragon's presence, a silent promise that its story, and hers, was far from over. Elder Vilmar approached, his expression a mixture of reverence and concern. "The creature," he began, his voice low, "it is tied to the heart, yes. But we must tread carefully. Miracles are not without cost, and the balance it has restored may yet require more of us." Anya looked at the elder, then down at the dragon. "It doesn't feel like a warning," she said. "It feels like a gift." The elder studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Perhaps it is both." The Frost Festival continued until the first light of dawn, the villagers' spirits as bright as the heart of winter itself. As the sky turned a pale grey, Anya sat quietly beneath the great evergreen, the frost dragon nestled in her lap. Its eyes closed and its breathing slowed, as if it, too, was content to rest. The heart of winter stood tall in the square, its light unwavering. The villagers would remember this festival as the most miraculous in their history, a turning point in their endless winter. Yet Anya knew that the frost dragon's arrival marked not just a miracle, but a mystery, a question left unanswered, a story unfinished. As the sun rose over the valley, the frost dragon stirred, its eyes opening to the first light of morning. It chirped softly and Anya smiled. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it together. The girl and the creature of frost, bound by a shared purpose and a wonder as vast as the endless winter that surrounded them.